Hello, Bible readers. Psalm 7 ended by saying, I will sing praise to the name of the Lord, the Most High. And then Psalm 8 is a psalm of praise. Not a coincidence, and it happens to be our first encounter with a hymn of praise in the Psalter. From what my Brueggemann-Bellinger commentary says, it stands out even among that subcategory. Usually a psalm of praise is written for the voice of a community to sing. Psalm 8 uses the first person I. When I look at your heavens. Not a big deal, but notable. The other unusual thing, though, is that it only addresses God in the second person. You have set your glory above the heavens. You have made them a little lower than God. About that God made humankind just a little lower than God. Let's get into that for a bit. So Psalm 8 is a continuation of this creation faith theme that we've had in the beginning of the Psalter. It starts with a celebration of God's glory, and what follows for 6 verses here in Psalm 8 is a celebration of humankind. Not only is creation a well-ordered machine that produces all these hunky-dory outcomes, as we've talked about, but the human person in Psalm 8 is named as God's governor. Humans have a crucial role in governing God's creation. So at one point, Brueggemann says, humankind, judging from Psalm 8, is not unlike God in this psalm, which, as jarring and farcical as that may seem to believers like me who have inherited the theological gifts of the Reformation that resonate with Paul, when he says things like, I do not do the things I ought to do, but the very things I hate. As odd as this then elevated status of humankind may seem, I also know it's not the first time the Bible makes a claim like this. Because this is how Genesis starts too, right? I mean, being a creation faith psalm, Psalm 8 calls upon the faith laid out in the creation story, which does include this idea that humans have dominion over all other creatures, etc., etc. And that's why this makes sense to me, because remember, in one of my first posts into this deep dive, I mentioned that Martin Luther, the 16th century German theologian, he called the Psalms the Little Bible. And not just because it randomly includes bits and pieces of all the different forms of theology in the entire Bible. I think what we're going to see is that it's actually a not so random variety of theological revelations as they were laid out through the whole Bible. So it makes sense, actually, that in these first Psalms, we'd start to see how Genesis begins. Remember, creation faith is about asserting the idea that God made everything and that it was designed to be the opposite of chaos. Creation is order. So to be good, or as Genesis says, very good, creation has to be order, which means creation is just and fruitful. So since that's how Genesis starts, since that's how the Bible starts, well, that's how the Psalms begin too, with an understanding of God as just and God's creation as fruitful when the Torah is followed. But here in Psalm 8, more than in previous Psalms, humans stand at the center of God's good order. In Job's 7th chapter, and this is really interesting, Psalm 8 is used to express the intensity of God's care for humankind. It's actually more than Job wants to handle. He feels oppressed because he can't escape God's attention. I want you to hear this quote from Job chapter 7. Job says, "What are human beings that you make so much of them?" That's the allusion to the 8th Psalm. That question, what are human beings that you make so much of them? But then he says more, that you set your mind on them, visit them every morning, test them every moment. Will you not look away from me for a while? Let me alone till I swallow my spit. What's too much for Job is not too much, though, for the author of Hebrews. There, Psalm 8 just gets straight up quoted to support the theology of Hebrews. But of course, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, Hebrews has a different spin on Psalm 8 than without knowledge of Jesus. Hebrews is like, hey, remember Psalm 8, everybody? When we'd say, you have crowned human beings with glory and honor? Well, now we know the rest of the story in Christ, that Jesus showed what it really means to take on God's kind of glory, honor, dominion. And what it means is to not just sit on a throne and have dominion like a passive regent waiting for their subjects to, kiss their ring. In Jesus, dominion is done by being a servant, by being obedient to God fully, completely, by serving God's people, and by serving God's entire creation, actually. True kingship, having seen and knowing Jesus, takes on a different flavor than we may have having read Psalm 8 without Jesus in mind. Last things about this psalm, it's envelope form. See, sometimes studying the form of a text can actually give us even more meaning as to what is this psalmist trying to get at. Its envelope form supports our theology that human power does at the end of the day bow to God, because that's the way it's constructed. Psalm 8 begins and ends with the same divine praise. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Those praises are surrounding all the other stuff about human power and human authority. The point is that both need to be held together, like a sandwich, like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. It's not very good, just the peanut butter and jelly. I'm not saying it's terrible, but the bread sure does bring it together and keep it together, right? Well, the same thing, the bread is fine all by itself, but what an improvement with the peanut butter and jelly. The point is that you have to have both this praise and this understanding of who humans are and what we're built to do. We need to read this whole psalm together. We need to remember all these parts together. Praise of God, and this is a point that Brueggemann makes, praise of God without honoring the power and authority God has given us humans, well, that produces passive people who refuse to do the work they're called to do well, to do faithfully. Like, we can't just be like, I just leave it all to you, God, while I do, whatever I'm going to do because I'm human. But on the other side of this, to use human power without remembering God is God. That is to foolishly try to wield power that just is not ours to have. We fail at that. Humankind is the crown of God's creation, but even human power is shaped and limited by the ultimate authority of the creating one. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.